Hi, this is the third video in this series on disorders of childhood and adolescence. In this video, we're going to be going over oppositional defiant disorder. And oppositional defiant disorder is one of the disorders in the disruptive impulse control and conduct disorders chapter in the DSM-5. And what is unique to these disorders specifically, and I'll read the highlighted part here, is that they show up in behaviors that violate the rights of others, such as aggression or destruction of property, and or that bring the individual into significant conflict with societal norms or authority figures. So, now, one of the things to keep in mind is that not all of the disorders in this section are disorders of childhood and adolescence. There are some that are for adults also. We're only going to look at oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder out of this chapter in the DSM. So let us have a look at oppositional defiant disorder. Okay. So what we see here, this is straight from the DSM again. This is the diagnostic criteria for oppositional defiant disorder. A pattern of angry or irritable mood, argumentative or defiant behavior, or vindictiveness lasting at least 6 months. And we need at least 4 symptoms from the following. So that's the what and the how long, the duration, right? So we have out of angry and irritable mood, it's described as either any of these 3. Often loses temper, is often touchy or easily annoyed, is often angry and resentful. For argumentative and defiant behavior, we have often argues with authority figures, or for children and adolescents with adults, often actively defies or refuses to comply with requests from authority figures or with rules, often deliberately annoys others, often blames others for his or her mistakes or misbehavior. And for vindictiveness, we have has been spiteful or vindictive at least twice within the past 6 months. So I want you to have a look at this disorder and, pause the video for a minute and just look at the diagnostic criteria here. Take a minute and think about them. And see if you see any issues, any problems that might arise in trying to use these diagnostic criteria to actually diagnose somebody. So I'm going to assume that you paused the video and that you're back now. One of my first problems, and I'll tell you, it's my problem, but it's also a known problem with this description, is the word often. What is considered often? And who decides? This is not scientific. This is not specific or scientific. And it's used to diagnose. So we would hope that the frequency would be measured somehow. What you consider often and what I consider often might be very different. And that goes back to our initial video in this series that talks about looking at culture and developmental stages for making diagnoses. So often makes it very, very difficult to make a correct diagnosis here. Another problem that one might have with this diagnosis is what is and what is not developmentally appropriate. So some of you might have looked at this or might be looking at this and saying, this doesn't seem all that unusual for a typical adolescent. So at what point is it severe enough to become a disorder? And that brings us back to the problem of often, doesn't it? Because it doesn't help us with severity. We need something to do with severity here. So a third problem that one might have with this disorder, and again, back to the beginning, the first video in the series, is this child well adapted to their surroundings? Are they well suited to their surroundings? Is something else going on, right? Is there something in their environment that is making them be, quarrelsome and irritable? For vindictiveness, and having been spiteful or vindictive at least twice within the past 6 months, that's a tough one. How many of us are able to sit and go, well, in the these last 6 months, have I been spiteful? That's a tough one. And it's hard to do with somebody else. It's hard to make that assessment. And another question is how unusual is that? I'm not saying it's desirable. I'm just asking, how unusual is it? And when is it considered no longer typical? Now, I do want to say that it's important not to discount every adolescent's irritability and defiance as just, that's the way adolescents are, right? We need to also make sure that we're not missing something. So I think it's valuable to look and see when you have a kid who blames others, is deliberately annoying, quarrelsome, angry, resentful, irritable. To not just take that in stride and say, well, that's just the way it is, but to talk to them and find out what's going on. And more important than talking, right? As Marilyn Manson once said, I listen. Listening to them. I know that quote from Marilyn Manson was probably weird. It's from a documentary by Michael Moore, where Michael Moore asks Marilyn Manson, what would he say to the Columbine shooters, the adolescents who shot their peers in their classroom? And Marilyn Manson said, I wouldn't say anything. I would listen. So that's where that comes from. So the key here is to look at this kid, listen, see if there's something going on, see if they need help with something in their surroundings. Maybe the adults are in the wrong. Maybe the adults are being particularly difficult or demanding behavior that's not developmentally appropriate, too strict. Who knows, right? So a difficult diagnosis. Often used, you'll see in group homes, other places where it's useful to diagnose kids so that the problem is no longer the adults, but the child's. I know I'm showing my bias here, and you can take it or leave it. It's my bias. Okay, I'm going to end this video here.